Eliza Carr divided the last of the cornmeal mush between two bowls and gave the boy the larger portion without letting him see her do it. There was nothing behind this, nothing left in the crock, nothing in the smokehouse, nothing in the cellar but one withered onion and the memory of better years. She set Sam's bowl down in front of him and kept her own hands folded over an empty plate, because a body can go a day on nothing if it must, and she had done it before and would do it again. Then a sound came from the yard, low under the moan of the November wind. A man, or what was left of one, had fallen against her gatepost. If your heart just turned over, if you already know you would have opened that door too, empty plate or no, then stay with me because this is where the story truly begins. Subscribe to this channel and ring the bell so the next one finds you. And drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Then come back to Dry Creek, Kansas in the lean autumn of 1887 because what a starving stranger did after a poor widow gave him. Her only supper is a thing the whole town would be talking about by spring. Her name was Eliza Carr. She was 24 years old, and Dry Creek had long ago decided she was a fool. She had been a widow 2 years by then. Daniel Carr had taken the lung fever in the hard winter of '85 and was 3 days dying, and he had left her a half section of cracked Kansas dirt, a boy not yet 3, and a note for $400 held by Cyrus Webb, who owned the store and the bank's good ear, and a fair number of the men who warmed themselves at his stove. The drought had come the summer after the burying, and had never properly gone. She had sold the milk cow, then the second mule, then her mother's good china, one careful piece at a time, the way a person spends the last of anything, slowly, hating every coin of it. She was a big woman, and she had been a big woman the whole of her life, and the town had a great deal to say about a big woman who could not even keep a quarter sections. Fed. When she had gone into Webb's store that very week to ask for credit against the spring, the clerk had looked her over the old way, top to bottom slow, and said loud enough for the men by the stove, "Well, Miss Carr, you don't look to be missing too many meals." The men had laughed. Eliza Carr set down the empty flour sack she had brought to fill, took her boy's hand, and walked out without giving them the satisfaction of a backward look. She had learned a long while ago that stopping only let them watch it land. Daniel had been a kind man and a poor manager, and the note Webb held had grown somehow larger every year she could not pay it, in figures she could not follow, and she had stopped trying to follow them, because arithmetic is no use when there is no money on either side of it. By that November the smokehouse was bare and the cellar held its one sad onion, and on the night this story turns she had split the last of the cornmeal between two bowls and meant to feed her son and lie down hungry. That was the night the stranger fell against her gate. He was the worst used man she had ever seen, still upright enough to fall. He was gaunt to the bone, his face cracked by sun and wind, a coat that had once been good gone to ragging him, and his boots worn clean through at the toe. He had been walking a long time and toward nothing in particular. She got him up under his arm and got him inside, and even then, even half dead, he tried to refuse her. "I got nothing to pay, ma'am," he said. "I won't take bread out of a child's mouth." They were the words of a proud man worn down to the last plank of himself. "The boy's already fed," she said, which was true, "and I made more than the two of us could eat," which was not. She set her own untouched bowl in front of him. He looked at it the way a starving man looks at food he has decided he does not deserve. Then the smell of it reached him, warm cornmeal and the spoonful of molasses she had stirred in, the last sweetness in the house, and his hands betrayed his pride. "When did you last eat?" she asked, already setting water to warm. "Don't recall," he said. His voice came out like a wheel turning on a dry axle. 3 days. Could be 4. Slow, she told him. Fast and you'll bring it up and waste it. He ate slow. He ate the way a body eats when it has not yet decided whether to go on living, and she stood by the stove and let him, and did not watch him too close, because some hungers a person ought to be allowed to answer in private. His name, when at last he gave it, was Caleb Doan, and he gave nothing past it. Not where he had come from, not where he was bound, because he was bound nowhere, and they both knew it. She made him a place in the barn under the only 2 blankets she could spare, and in the morning she expected him gone the way such men go, with the spoons or without them. She had stopped expecting much of anyone. It cost less. He did not go. That was the first surprising thing, and it is the thing every telling of this story turns upon. When she came out at first light, he had already found the axe and was splitting the woodpile she had been rationing 1 stick at a time against the Winter. He had set the two fallen fence rails back on their posts. He worked without being asked and without one word about it, because he was a man who had nothing left to give but the labor of his two hands, and he had quietly decided to give that. There was one animal left on the place, a mean half-broke colt Daniel had bought cheap and never finished, that bit and struck and had been judged worthless by every man in the county who valued his fingers. Caleb walked into that corral the third morning with nothing but time and a low, even voice, and he did not fight the colt, and he did not flatter it. He simply outlasted it. By the end of the week, the animal that had taken a piece out of two grown men was following Caleb Doan across the yard like a dog, and Eliza, watching from the kitchen window with flour to her wrists, understood that the half-dead drifter she had fed was no ordinary saddle tramp. A man does not gentle a ruined horse that way by accident. A man learns it across a whole life. The boy knew it before she let herself. Sam was 5 years old and had not had a man pay him any mind in 2 years, and he took to following Caleb the length of the property, handing up nails the man did not need and asking the kind of questions that have no end to them. Caleb flinched from the boy at the first. Eliza saw it, the small turning away, the way a man steps wide around an open grave, but he bore it, and then he bore it easier. And one cold noon she found her son asleep in the clean hay with his head against the drifter's arm, and Caleb sitting still as a fence post so as not to wake him, staring at nothing with a look on his face she was not meant to see. The child trusted him first. The child is always the proofs. She only confirmed it later. She got down Daniel's box of papers that same week, meaning to know to the dollar what she owed before the reckoning came, and what she found instead, reading the original note against the yearly statements Webb's clerk had copied out, was that the figures did not add. She was no scholar, but she could see plainly enough that $400 does not become near $700 in 2 dry years, unless a man is charging interest upon his own interest and calling it bookkeeping. She could not have argued it in a court, but she knew it, and she folded the papers small and kept them in her apron, because a thing known is not nothing, even when you cannot yet prove it. That was the only night she let it take her. When the boy was down and the house had gone dark, Eliza Carr turned her face to the cold wall so Sam would not hear it, and let 2 years come at once, the husband 3 days dying, the china sold off plate by plate, the laughter at the stove, and now the slow plain theft of even the little she had left, dressed up in a ledger she had no learning to fight. She wept hard and short, with her fist pressed to her own mouth. Then she dried her face on the quilt and lay still until her breath came even again, because morning comes for the grieving the same as for everyone else, and the boy would want his breakfast at dawn, whether or not the world was fair. She did not let it take her a second time. Caleb's care came the way his work came, without announcement. The firewood appeared stacked high by the kitchen door. The roof that had wept all autumn stopped weeping. He took to staying at the supper table a few minutes past the eating, not talking, just there, and she took to letting him, and neither of them said a word about any of it. By the third week there was meat again. Caleb took Daniel's old rifle down off its pegs, oiled it, and came back from the draw with rabbits, and once a young deer, and Eliza did the thing she had not been able to do in a whole season. She cooked. The cabin filled with the smell of a stew thick enough to stand a spoon in, and Sam ate until his belly went round and tight, and she ate too, sitting down, a full plate of her own for the first time since the burying. She made no fuss of it, but she noticed that Caleb watched her eat with something easing in his face, the way a man watches a thing he has had a hand in setting right, and she let him watch and said nothing. Cyrus Webb rode out the third week to look over the place he meant to have. He came all oily courtesy, and he did not care for the sight of a strange, capable man mending fence on property he had counted on taking cheap, and so he came to the point of it. The note was called. The place would go to auction on the courthouse steps the 1st of December, 11 days off. Then, softer, with a look that turned Eliza's stomach, he allowed that a woman alone might yet come to some private arrangement that kept a roof over her and the boy. She did not say a word. She held his eye until he found his hat suddenly interesting, and he rode off, and Caleb, who had heard all of it from the barn, set down the hammer very carefully, the way a man sets down a thing he is afraid he will otherwise throw. It was that night, Caleb told her, because some doors only open after another man has come and reminded a house what it stands to lose. He told it flat, no tears in it, the way the truly gutted tell the worst things. He had a wife once, Mercy, and a girl 4 years old, and a small spread down in the nations. A grass fire came through while he was a day's ride off, buying seed corn, and it took the house with the both of them inside it. And he had come back to a black square in the prairie, and a chimney standing over nothing. I figured I'd lie down some night out walking and just not get up, he said. Wasn't aiming anywhere. Then I fell against your gate. Eliza did not tell him it was not his fault, and she did not tell him his mercy would want him to go on, because she had buried her own and knew the worthlessness of being told such things. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his once and left it there, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say that would not have made it smaller than it was. They sat like that a long while. The fire did the only talking. There was no money and no recourse in 11 days, and then there was the horse. Cyrus Webb owned a black stallion he had bought back east to be looked at. 16 hands of fury that had crippled one man's leg and broken another, S-arm and put a third off horses for good. Webb could not ride it and would not sell it cheap, and he had taken to standing in the saloon and declaring grandly before whatever crowd was on hand that he would forgive the debt of any man in the county who could ride the black devil to a standstill. He made the boast freely because he believed to his bones it could not be done, and a boast that costs nothing buys a rich man a great deal of admiration. Caleb heard of it from a hand at the feed store. He looked at the auction date, and at the boy, and at the woman who had fed a dying stranger her last supper and gone to bed with nothing, and he made up his mind. The harder thing was the staying. It was not the horse that frightened him. He had gentled every animal God ever made angry. It was that to break the horse was to claim a life again, to plant himself beside a woman and a boy and stand to lose them the way the fire had taken the others. The night before the 1st of December, she found him in the barn at midnight, saddling nothing, just standing with his hand on the stall door like a man at a crossing he could not make himself cross. She did not beg him. She had begged no man for anything in 2 years and would not start. "I'm not asking you to stay for our sake," she said, "but don't go telling yourself that leaving is mercy on me. It's fear on you, and you've a right to it. Just call it by its name." Then she went back inside. In the morning he was still there. The 1st of December brought the whole town out onto the courthouse steps. Half of them to watch the fat widow lose her place, and half to see whether any fool would truly try the black devil, and Cyrus Webb expansive in a good coat at the front of all of it, with the auctioneer at his elbow. Caleb Doane stepped out of the crowd and called Webb on his own boast, plainly in front of every soul there. Would he honor it, or was it only saloon talk? And Webb, cornered by his own public words, unable to back down in front of the town without standing exposed as a coward and a liar, had no choice but to say he would. Certain in his heart the horse would settle the matter inside a minute. The horse did not settle it. What the town watched over the next 40 minutes was not a fight but a kind of terrible patience. It threw him twice. Twice he rose up out of the frozen mud, slower the second time, and walked back and took hold of the rope again. And that second rising was the thing Dry Creek would tell of for years afterward. Not that he stayed on, but that he got up. The stallion reared and twisted and threw itself against the corral rails hard enough to split one, and a woman in the crowd cried out, and Sam hid his face in his mother's skirts, and still the man would not be thrown and would not be cruel. The cold steam came off the horse like smoke off a banked fire, and then, between one breath and the next, the way it always happens, the fight went out of the animal all at once, and the black devil stood with its head hung low and its sides heaving, beaten at last by the one force it had never once been shown, a man with nothing left to lose and no anger left in him to spend. When it was over, the steps were dead silent. Then Cyrus Webb, watching his cheap certainty cost him $700 in front of everyone he meant to impress, opened his mouth to call it talk, to call it no proper wager, to weasel out the way his kind always does. He did not get the chance. Eliza Carr stepped up onto the bottom step with Daniel's papers in her hand and her voice steady, and she said there was a worse cheat present that morning than a man trying to welsh on a bet that the note this man held had been $400 the day her husband died and had been fattened to near 7 by figures no honest soul would put his name to, and she handed the papers up to the county clerk and asked him to read the columns aloud. He read them. The town did the arithmetic Webb had counted on no one doing, and there it was, in front of the same neighbors who had laughed at her by the stove. A man who padded a widow's debt and welshed his own word in the same hour. Caleb Doane had spoken perhaps 100 words in the 6 weeks the town had known him, and he spent the next of them plainly, before he could be thanked and before Eliza could be pitied. 6 weeks back I was 3 days from dying in a ditch, he said, and the steps went quiet to hear him. This woman that you all call a fool fed a dead stranger her only supper and went to her bed hungry to do it. There's not one of you standing here would have done the same, and I know it, because I've walked through 100 towns full of you. He let that sit. I owe her my life. I aim to spend what's left of it wherever she is if she'll have me. Then he was done, because he was a man who said less than was expected and meant every word more for it. Eliza Carr stood on the bottom step in front of the hole of Dry Creek and did not weep, and did not look down, and did not say one further word, because the words had all been said and none more from her were needed. She only reached down and took her son's hand, the same way she had taken it, walking out of Webb's store 6 weeks before. But this time the street was silent, and this time not one soul standing in it was laughing. Webb left Dry Creek before the next snow, his note voided by his own Welsh bet, and his name ruined by his own books, and he did not come back. Some of the town changed its face toward Eliza that morning on the steps. Some only went silent, beaten, which in a town like Dry Creek comes to the same thing in the end. None of them ever again said a word about her size, or her supper, or her sense. The spring came green for the first time in 3 years. The black stallion, gentled, stood at stud and threw fine colts, and word of the man who had broken him traveled. And before long Caleb Doan was breaking horses for half the ranches in the county off the same cracked half-section the town had written off. There were 2 cows in the barn again, and a garden coming up, and a boy who had grown loud and brown, and forever underfoot, and the table was the thing. The woman who had once divided her last bowl now kept a pot on the back of the stove for anyone who came down the Dry Creek road with an empty belly, and they came, drifters and widows and hard-luck men, and she fed every one of them, because she of all people knew what one full bowl could turn into. Eliza had been told the whole of her life that she was too much and worth too little, too big, too plain, too foolish to manage, too much woman to be wanted. She had given away her last meal on the strength of nothing but her own heart, and her own heart had turned out to be right. She had never needed the town's leave to know her own worth. She had settled that account herself the night she opened a door to a dying man with an empty plate before her, and nothing Dry Creek thought before or said after had ever owned a single share of it. 23 years on, in the spring of 1910, their granddaughter was married under the cottonwood at the foot of the home pasture, and Sam, grown now, with a horse ranch of his own 2 counties over, stood up to give her away, and half a Dry Creek came out in its Sunday best to bear witness, because some lessons a town learns and keeps. Eliza Carr Doan stood at the edge of it all, broad and gray and easy in her own skin, and watched the life she had grown out of a single bowl of cornmeal. She had not been too much, it turned out. She had been exactly enough, and then some, and there had always been room at her table for one more.